Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. Welcome to today's bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. And folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's bonus, shall we? Today's first part of the upload. A friend of mine at church told me about this one time he was driving down the road through the woods when it was pretty foggy out. He saw something out of the corner of his eye from the left and in front of his van. He swerved to miss it, and they kind of missed each other. All he could see was a huge, hairy back level with his windshield wipers. He was driving a van similar to a Chevy C20 with a very short, stubby hood. At the time, he assumed it was a bear, and now, looking back, he thinks it was possibly a Dogman or a Bigfoot, because we don't have any bear big enough here in Pennsylvania to have the bear's back be level with his hood. But he can't say for sure. Today's second part of the upload. My friend and I go fishing pretty often down at the river, which runs through our small town in Central Valley of California. This particular spot is relatively close to a few of the more expensive houses in town. It's near the edge of town, so on one side is an access road with homes, and on the other is miles and miles of orange orchards. From the dirt parking lot, the walk is just through an orchard and along a few river washes down to the shoreline where we like to fish in the summer. We had been fishing since about 5:40 p.m. at this spot today with nothing out of the ordinary happening, until my friend left for a few minutes. He retraced our path to retrieve some stuff he had left upstream that he didn't think we would need. It was late dusk, early night, by this time maybe 8:30, 9 o'clock. Flashlights were necessary to see more than 10 feet in front of you. He was gone for 10-15 minutes while I waded upstream in the shallow water with my light and net, trying to catch some crawfish to eat. As soon as he came back, he called out, "Where are you?" with noticeable concern in his voice. I called back from around a bit of a curve in the river that I was in the water. I figured he just didn't see me and was worried about me drowning or something. He then revealed to me that as he was packing the stuff up he had left, he was growled at by an animal. He shone his light in the direction of the noise to see this fox with orange eyes looking back at him. He noted that the body was very large, but slender and oddly shaped. That could have been because it was starved or rabid, which also may explain why, as he yelled and kicked dirt in the direction, it just slowly walked toward him unfazed. He was backing up toward where I was for a few yards while the fox thing followed him. For whatever reason, he was so unnerved by this behavior that he said he began screaming out for me and running away from this creature. So that is the part of the night that was a little weird, but I figured it was just a rabid fox or one defending its kits. In hindsight, it could only really have been rabid one since they don't have baby young enough to defend until spring. Regardless, I was not too worried about it because I've spent enough time in the woods and at the river to know animals will do weird shit That doesn't make sense to us. After he came back and explained what had happened, we just messed around trying to catch some crawdad and carp in the river with our flashlights, checked my minnow trap and whatnot. Pretty suddenly, I got an unexplainable feeling of unease. It wasn't intense enough for me to say anything, and I just chalked it up to being anxious, or an animal or someone else nearby. I didn't waste any time getting out of the water, though, and I started packing my stuff up on the beach. As I'm packing up, my friend kept looking up the dry river wash back from where he had come from. The second time he heard it, he was fumbling for his knife, and I heard it for the first time as well. It sounded like something at least as big as me snapping branches under his feet as it moved. It sounded like it was just on the other side of a small island separating where the river is running now and where it splits off and runs when it's full, about 30 yards away. This usually isn't a big deal, as we hear raccoon and possum all the time down there, and there's always the possibility of it being one of the many homeless people living around there. But for whatever reason, we were both feeling uneasy about what was going on, without really understanding why. Then our fear was justified by an absolute evil series of screams. The only accurate way I can describe it is evil. It was relatively high-pitched, but it was also guttural, like you could hear fluid in its throat. It was breathy and sounded dead and monotone, like my vocal cords were completely torn, and I tried to clear my throat while also screaming. It might sound like what this sounded like. A wheezy, throaty, mid to high-pitched yell/scream. It started with maybe 2 or 3 second-long screams, then progressed into longer screams and peaked at what seemed like 5 to 10 second long scream. Then trailed back off into shorter screams and stopped about 20 to 30 seconds after it started. I can't remember what my friend and I were doing while this happened. I don't remember if we looked at each other or not, but I was definitely frozen as my brain scrambled to fit what was happening into a slot of past experience. But this sounded like no animal I have ever heard. I know what owls sound like. I know what fox screams sound like. I know what nearly every animal in this area sounds like. This thing didn't even really sound like an animal. It sounded dead and evil. My heart sank deeper into my chest the longer it went on, and I could vividly hear the fluid in its throat, and the distinct wah as it opened its mouth and yelled. And that's what it felt like. It felt like it was staying just out of sight, yelling directly at us. My friend quickly packed his stuff up, and we had to walk toward where the sound comes from to get out of there. I wasn't feeling scared like my heart was pounding. Instead, I felt sinking feeling, almost like I had to puke. We swiftly walked back, scanning every tree and brush on either side of us, with our lights occasionally turning back to check behind us. It didn't feel real. It felt like I had entered a horror movie scene and was about to die, or a nightmare where I suddenly became lucid and realized something is after me. I've had my fair share of odd things happen to me in the woods, multiple trees falling with no wind, strange whistles, lights in the sky, rocks thrown at me, etc. But nothing made my stomach sink like that scream did. We eventually made it out to the orchard, and as we were trying to wrap our brains around what we had just heard, we heard it again, a bit further this time to our right. But it wasn't screaming, it was snarling and almost vocalizing or growling or something. It lasted no longer than 4 seconds, and we walked the final 20 feet to my car and left. Well, that's my experience. The fox thing was bizarre, but the yell and snarl was so blatant and evil in such a primal way that I cannot stop hearing it in my head. When I first read that, I've had 2 subscribers that are from the Tazewell, Virginia area. And there is a cave off of one of the roads out in Tazewell. And I've heard both, maybe even three people, talk about a dogman with a fox-like head. And I'm just wondering if that possibly could have been one of those dogmen. I don't really buy into the variants or types of dogmen. If I do, or if I'm going to, it's going to be along coonbow with four different types, not variant A, type B14. I don't buy that, and I don't buy the person who created that because they've never seen a dogman. The creature that I saw the night that I had my encounter, I'll be full honest with you. I've interviewed quite the many people, and I've probably only heard maybe 5 or 6 different people describe almost exactly what I've seen. One of the big reasons why I don't buy into the variants, or whatever the hell that person calls his little list, that is, first, well, he never saw anything, but second, just like humans, or just like any animal, we all look different. We all have different features. So I can't label a creature like that. I know coonbow has 4 different types that he uses, and it's a Sasquatch. He's got the East Coast, the Pacific Northwest, the kind of werewolf, huge Sasquatch with a short muzzle, and Dogman is number 4. That's the one I buy into. Why? Because coonbow has about 30 to 40 years of experience in his belt, and he's seen multiple creatures. So, but anyway, back to what I was saying. The fox-headed one in Tazewell, Virginia, that's pretty friggin' creepy, you know? But that's kind of what I'm leaning at, that these guys saw out there in California. I don't know. I won't take up any more of your time. Let's just get on to the next encounter. Today's third part of the upload. Hello, sir. This happened when I was around 15. I'm 19 now. I'm still thinking about this, but to this day, I never knew what it was that I saw, and I'm hoping to get some answers. So it's around 3:30 in the morning in Greenville, North Carolina. I live in a little neighborhood in a rural area surrounded by woods, so wildlife is common. I hear my dog barking from upstairs, so I go up and see what she's staring at out the window. I don't see anything, so I go outside to the front porch. In my yard was this mangy-looking coyote/fox. It was too dark to see. The only way I could tell was the streetlights. It had no hair on its tail. It was very thin, and it looked sick. But it was huge. It had hair missing from its face as well. I yelled to it to get going, because I'm tired and my dog's yapping. And it just doesn't leave. It lingers around for a while, and I'm 15 and stupid, so I decide to scare it off by getting closer. And then the scariest shit happens. It stands up on its hind legs, and its legs were unnaturally long, deer-like almost. They looked like they were bent backwards, and it occurred to me that wasn't exactly normal. Thinking about it now, it looked more deer-like when it stood up, but looked canine, like on all fours. It was as if it changed forms. It sprints off on its hind legs like a human, taking huge steps and runs off near the train tracks by my house. It stopped sprinting midway under the streetlight to look at me, and I noped the hell out of there. Its eyes stopped glowing when it stood up as well, and its ears changed when it stood up. It looked more like a deer as well, but I swear it was a canine, big fox ears. But then it's almond-shaped like a deer. Anyway, it freaked the hell out of me, and I can't find any information about it. This sounds like bullshit, but I know what I saw. I can never forget that night. My dog didn't stop barking till 6 in the morning. Today's fourth part of the upload. Back in 2015, I made a self-funded trip to St. Louis, Missouri, to visit my cousin who lived with her husband for about 5 weeks. I'm from Australia, and this was my first trip overseas. Though I'm 18 and a female, I had plenty of common sense, so my parents trusted me to make the trip, which included a 16-hour flight across the Pacific and a 5-hour stopover in Dallas Airport alone. All of this I did with relative ease. The stay at my cousin's was great. We saw the St. Louis sights, and I practically enjoyed visiting the national parks. Being a nature-oriented person myself and very good with animals, this is important to my encounter, as I'm able to identify animals on site due to a childhood interest in reading books about animals around, so I know a lot of the anthropology or morphology of different animals. Anyway, one night my cousin decided to take me to the famous ice cream parlor, whose name I can't remember, but it's really well known and kind of set up like a kiosk. To get there, we had to drive 20 minutes. It was my cousin and her husband in front, with myself and their 2 younger children in back. As we drove, we passed through the area that was lit up by street lamps, but very deserted. To visualize this part of the road, it's split in 2 parts with a medium strip separating the 2 opposite flows of traffic. On our side of the road was residential homes, and on the other side was a large storm drain that was once a river. There's a large grassy and treed area on the river side that separates it from the road, which has multiple streetlights. It was rather windy night as well, as it was autumn at the time. Now, I've always enjoyed looking out the window at night while driving, and at this point I was looking out the window across from me, which meant I was looking across my 2 little cousins. We were traveling slowly, probably 80 kilometers or 50 miles an hour, so I got a good look at the trees in the median strip. As we neared the next light, I saw what I thought was a coyote, just standing underneath the streetlight. The night was so dark around the light, so it really illuminated this thing. I was excited. This was my first larger American animal. In Australia, we don't have wolves or coyote, only feral dog, fox, dingoes, which don't live near me. I don't point this out to anyone in the car because as we got closer, I realized it was too big to be a coyote. It was more the size of a wolf on steroids, I'd imagine, but its characteristics were of a coyote. Pointed face, longer tail. It didn't look like a dog. It had wild gray brindled coat and thick hackles that were raised along its back, though it showed no signs of distress. It just stood under the light with its head lowered. But the thing that kept me quiet was the fact that it was staring directly at me. Not at the car, not at anyone else in the car, but me. Our eyes were locked, and I realized that its eyes were yellow, like a bright lamp, like yellow. It didn't frighten me, but it made me incredibly uncomfortable, like I had sudden rush of adrenaline as soon as our eyes made contact. I felt like prey. We passed this beast/creature, and it continued to stare at me as we drove by. Looking over my shoulder confirmed that it was still looking at me. The strange thing was, aside from its head, this, quote, coyote hadn't moved. Not a leg, not even its coat in the wind. As we got further down the road, I asked if anyone had seen it, to which the answer was no. I found it odd, as it was so noticeable under the streetlight. Anyway, we got our ice cream, me thinking about this coyote thing the whole time, and as we headed home along the same road, I looked for it, but couldn't see it. I paid no mind after I couldn't see it again, but a strange thing happened later that night. At around 4 in the morning, I awoke, feeling terrible in my bed. I remained perfectly still with little breathing. I do this when I'm frightened. It was utterly silent, like not even normal night noises that you'd expect in a town. Then suddenly there's this huge bang. I heard a car alarm going off, and later ambulance lights. It turns out there was a car crash just outside of my cousin's house. We asked around and found out that the driver had swerved to avoid a large animal and hit the power pole. No one could identify the animal. I wonder if it was my coyote creature, and if so, did it follow me? I know about stories of skinwalkers and Dogman and Sasquatch and stuff, but I thought that was in southwestern United States, not Missouri. I've always been sensitive to supernatural things, and I got an unnatural vibe from that coyote creature, and that feeling of terror before the car crash was queer. I also know that my cousin's husband is Native American heritage. What the hell did I see under the streetlight that night? Today's final encounter. My experience takes place when I was a child. My family had a bunch of land near Ottawa National Forest in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. My dad, 2 older brothers, and my uncle were avid outdoorsmen, and we were always hunting, fishing on family land. There was a little cabin on the place, and that's where we would stay and spend several weekends a year. I wasn't really into hunting at the time, but I liked to go and stay in the cabin. Anyway, the event took place over a couple of days, but I can remember it felt like yesterday. It was one fall during deer season. We were all up at the cabin for the weekend. The guys would all go out hunting, and I would stay behind in the cabin and make food for them when they returned. I liked it because they would leave for several hours, leaving me to the cabin by myself. It made me feel grown up for a few hours, like I was living by myself. Anyway, my dad, my uncle, and 2 brothers would all leave at the same time and go to multiple hunting locations they had scouted out the previous trips to the cabin. I distinctly remember one evening when they all got back, my uncle was acting very strange. He didn't seem like his normal joking self. He looked a bit white and nervous. Normally, he's quick to talk about what he had seen while out hunting, but not this night. He hardly talked at all. The next day, they all went out hunting again, and when they returned, my uncle looked visibly upset again. He began quickly moving around the cabin, packing up all of his things and loading them into his truck. My dad and brothers were concerned and were asking him what he was doing. He was shaking and yelling at them to all just leave him alone. He was done. He was going home. We all were a little concerned, like, what gives? He said he was leaving, that we should as well. My dad took him by the arm and led him out to the truck. I could see them in a loud verbal disagreement out by the truck. I couldn't make out what they were talking about, but the discussion was heated. Finally, my uncle got in his truck and left in a big hurry. My dad came back into the cabin and told us everything was all right and not to be worried. My uncle had some things he needed to take care of back home. I knew this was a lie, but kind of forgot about it for a while. We stayed a few more days and then went back home. Now, fast forward 12 years later, my uncle was in a very bad automobile accident. He was hospitalized and died 4 days later. After the funeral, we all went back to my aunt's house and were eating, drinking, and socializing with the entire family. At one point, I found myself out in the garage where my father and a bunch of older relatives were just hanging out. when someone brought up a very strange story. My Uncle Bill asked my father, "Hey, do you remember that crazy story Jerry talked about at the family cabin?" My father said, "Yeah, and that we probably shouldn't talk about it right now." And they kind of moved on. I was like, "Wait a second. What's Uncle Bill talking about? What story?" My dad looked at me and said, "Do you remember the time up at the cabin when Uncle Jerry got upset and left the cabin in a hurry?" I said, "Yeah, actually, I do remember that." He then told several of us that he had a strange encounter with something he can't explain. At that moment, my Uncle Bill said he saw a werewolf. We're all like, "What?" My dad went on to say that he was correct, that even my Uncle Jerry said that he was on his way to the tree stand when he came across something very terrifying. He saw a large, dark fur-covered creature that looked something like the movie The Howling. He said it was 6 to 7 feet tall and walking on 2 legs. What he saw was something demonic, something not natural, something not of this earth. This hulking beast was the most evil and terrifying thing you could ever imagine. It was pure evil. He could feel it in his bones. Whatever this thing was, it was standing in a clearing and was slowly walking upright, just looking at its surroundings, sniffing the air, and slowly making its way through the woods. It had a purpose, but he didn't know what. It had this strange strength about it, both physical and metaphysical, like it was in this world that it should not be. He just watched in shock, not really knowing what to do. Yeah, he was armed, but he knew that trying to use his rifle would be a big mistake. He just stood there, in awe of this strange and frightening creature. What was it? Why was it there? Was he losing his mind? He later told my dad that something is wrong with this place, this land. It's cursed and you shouldn't hunt here anymore. And for God's sake, don't let your children around here anymore. Get out of here as quick as you can while you still can. I didn't see him, but he wasn't hanging around after that anymore. He gathered all of his things and left in a hurry and never returned. In fact, after that event, he rarely spoke to any of us again. He was an avid hunter and said it definitely was not a bear. He left that evening and never went back to the cabin again. I don't know what he saw, and my dad said he didn't know either, but Jerry was different after that night. I wish I had more details. I miss my Uncle Jerry. He was a kind soul. And I believe that my Uncle Jerry saw a Dogman that night. Here's a bonus encounter for all you fine folks that support this channel. My husband and I were driving to my brother's for Christmas a few years back. We lived in regional Victoria, Australia, and he lived in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. It was about 2, 3 in the morning, pitch black. Once we were reasonably close, 4 or 5 hours away, we had to go up and over this mountain rainforest area in the middle of nowhere to get there. It was raining, misty, and freezing cold, which was weird because it's the middle of summer. And anyone who lives in Australia knows it gets hot in the summer here. But I figured rainforests are usually wet and cold. Anyway, we're rounding this really narrow corner, and out of nowhere, up beside me, was this thing. It looked like it was trying to cross the road, and it stopped and ran back into the woods when we almost hit it. My husband thinks it was a giant koala. He doesn't believe in the paranormal, anything weird. But he didn't get a good look at it like I did. It was right next to me on the passenger side door. It looked like a skinny, lanky person on all fours covered in fur. It had the face of a person, the body of a person, but was walking on its knuckles and legs. Its eyes glowed like a cat's eyes in the dark as our headlights hit it. It freaked me out, and to this day I still don't know what the hell we saw, but it's burned into my memory. Was it a giant mutant koala? A Yahweh? A Sasquatch? What the hell do you guys think? And there you have it, folks. Today's bonus, which I do hope you all enjoyed as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that keeps this channel growing and going, and what gives folks like us a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories, judgment-free, just simply treated with the respect that we all deserve. Thank you. Everyone, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant. Keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless.